Dr. Darrel Ray is a clinical psychologist. He is also an author and activist. His books include The God Virus and Sex and God. He hosts the Secular Sexuality podcast, and he's also a friend. And we had some post-election conversations sort of off the air, and I thought, why not put them on the air? So I've asked Darrel to join me. How you doing, brother?
Great. Thanks for having me.
So you were up with the rest of us on election night watching the numbers come in and feeling that pit in the bottom of your stomach as they did?
Absolutely, absolutely. When Florida went, I thought this is bad, really bad.
Post-election, as I don't even think the dust is really settling at all. Those who thought the conversations would end were completely wrong. Post-election, we see the rhetoric continues, the emotions continue to be high, everybody continues, in many cases, to be speaking in extremes. What do you think about all this?
Well, I actually think it depends on what perspective you're seeing the election from in some ways. I mean, I'm an old white guy, so I feel less threatened in some ways than if I were a middle-aged black man or an Asian woman trying to, make a career with a child at home or something.
Like a Muslim immigrant or someone to be affected by LGBT legislation or any of that stuff, yeah.
Exactly. And if I was a Latina of any kind, there would be a reasonable basis for fear. So I think the perspective, I don't want to come off as a white privileged guy because I understand what is going on out there. I understand what this fear and terror, almost terror is. That's what I'm seeing in some people. I had one person email me and say, I've got to talk to you. This is a person I've never talked to before, but they said, I know you're a psychologist. I need to talk to you. So we had a session, and they were just totally dysfunctional over this election. They said, I can't work. I can't talk to anybody. I can't even finish my emails. Once I get them started, my brain just won't function. Well, since that time, I've seen dozens of people have contacted me, or I've seen on the internet, or I've interacted with them in some way by text, and it's happening to a lot of people. So this is unusual. It's very different from other presidential.
Let me stop you there, though. I mean, I have a little bit of a hard time with that. I'm not talking about those who have a predisposition to heightened emotion, the hypersensitivity they've got. Maybe they suffer from depression, or there's some psychological predisposition in place that causes stress to really send them over the edge. But when someone says, I lost the election, I can't go to work, I can't finish an email because of the election, it's hard for me to process that. So help me through it.
Well, what's going on is people are focusing on the future, and they're perseverating. They're just rethinking and rethinking and rethinking the same thoughts. What'll happen here? What'll happen there? They're living 3 months, 6 months, 4 years down the road, and they're not living in the present. It's almost our brains cannot distinguish between reality and imagination. And the best example of that is when at night you wake up in a cold sweat from a nightmare. That's your brain creating something imaginary. And yet your brain responds exactly as if you were in that situation that caused such terror in your nightmare. Well, you're doing that the same way during the daytime. Only in this case, you're saying, oh my gosh, what's going to happen to my rights as a Latino in the United States in 3 months? Is the FBI going to knock on my door, as soon as the day after he's elected? Is a woman saying, is my daughter ever going to be able to get an abortion? So all these things are going through people's minds, and they're legitimate concerns, but they're not legitimate fears at this point in time. And the reason for that is there's nothing you can do about it at this point in time. So to expend enormous amounts of energy, to lose work time, to disrupt your life because of this projected fear is similar to having a nightmare. Now, many people have told me, I feel like I'm living in a nightmare right now, and I hope I wake up from it. And what I want to do is help people gain control of their emotions at this point in time, so they can then use that emotional energy towards something positive and productive. You called it putting one foot in front of the other. That's a good way to put it. But I want to do it as an emotional. Let's find out. I put a podcast up just earlier this week saying, here's some techniques you can use right now to get control of your emotions. And the reason I put that up, and the reason I, in fact, wanted to talk to you about this, was because I see people letting their emotions get out of control, and that means they're not doing what they need to do. And they're not thinking, what's my next step? Where do I want to go? How do I want to contribute to the movement, to my family, to my own health? People are sitting on their couch, just commiserating while they're eating donuts or drinking coffee when they could be out doing something productive. They could go out, at least take a walk, at least exercise, at least do some mindfulness activities. There's lots of things they could do, but no, they're focusing on how terrible things are when there's no lion ready to eat them and there's no burglar getting ready to break in the door. So
no, that doesn't fly on social media. Social media is in many ways the playground of extremes, is it not? I mean, they find the most inflammatory, the most hyperbolic, the most generalized, the most overstatement. One great example, and I'm not coming to Trump's defense in terms of his character, but when I see these memes put out by progressives that show Klan members and they say, this is the Trump voter, this is the Trump supporter, and I think, well, you found a specific example of some white supremacists who support Trump. But this is not we're going to be intellectually honest, it's not a fair representation of every one of the 59 million people who voted for Trump. It's a hugely complex sea of perspectives and opinions. And it's controversial to say as well, they're not all racists. They're not all anything. What's that line that says all generalizations are false?
Yeah.
And yet you and I, Darrel, are watching this social media phenomenon where people, I think, are so desperate to be heard and so desperate to express outrage that they tend to lean on overstatement when we should be more honest about those types of things. I don't know. Have you witnessed the phenomenon on Twitter and Facebook?
Oh, yeah, I absolutely have. And there's this entire election's been overstatement on both sides.
Yeah, the conservatives have certainly done it as well. I'm going to throw that out. They're not off the hook. Yeah.
Actually, I think they did the best job of it, and as a result, they tied into the fear factor that many voters had. But that's really not that's not where I'm most interested right now. You've hit on one area that I'm very concerned about, and that is people are on social media. They're on Facebook, they're on Twitter, and then they're getting emotional upset. And they're maintaining that emotional upset over and over again. They can't go to sleep at night. They can't take care of their kids. They can't focus on their job. And they're telling me they can't. Well, I've got some suggestions I want people to think about. And that is, number one suggestion is get off social media for a while. It's just cranking up your emotional response.
Just unplug.
At least back off. At least back off.
Is it that epidemic, Darrel? I mean, are that many people feel incapacitated that they cannot function?
I'm pretty sure there's a lot of people. I don't know how many, but I've just seen too much of it.
All right.
Far more than I've ever seen at any other time. I've been through lots of elections. I've never had people call me up and says, I've got to talk to you, or text me and say, what's your take on this? Are we all going down the tubes? Well, that's just unusual. That's very different. Now, maybe
I didn't mean to derail the train there. I know you were speaking your first point to social media. I'll allow you to continue. Sorry about that.
Yeah. So I just want people, even if you're not even concerned about the election. I had one woman say, "Thanks for putting that podcast up because I'm concerned about something else in my life, and those techniques helped." So it's not a matter of whether just that. It's that people tend to get hooked, get into mental loops, and they can't get out of those mental loops. And that's what I see a lot of progressives doing right now. They're in a mental loop, and they can't get out of it. They can't stop thinking about what's going to happen to my rights as a woman, or what's going to happen to my children if I'm deported, or whatever it is. And there's these thoughts are going through their head, and that means they're using energy in that direction that they could be using somewhere else.
In my house, we call it what-ifing. You could just what-if yourself into a lather, and you think too much along those lines, and you can drive yourself absolutely crazy.
In cognitive psychology, we call it catastrophizing. And the fact is, the worst case scenario is what you're thinking about. What's the absolute worst case that could happen? Now, then what happens is your brain tunes into that as if it's reality. It tunes in like the tiger is ready to attack you or the burglar's ready to come in the door. Your brain actually responds like that. Just like you're having a nightmare and your brain responds. When you start thinking over and over and over again, what's the worst possible scenario in this election result, then your brain can't go anywhere else, and you're wasting a lot of time, a lot of energy. You get upset. There are lots of other things don't get taken care of in your life. I want people to recover from this emotionally, not so they can ignore it. I want them to recover it so they can go back out and kick ass in the next election or whatever direction they want to go with their lives. But I hear people say, I'm hopeless. I'm helpless. I did everything I can, and now it still didn't. Well, that is life. There's a lot of times we get knocked down, and we just got the shit kicked out of us, so to speak. Well, what are you going to do? Lay down and complain about it? Or I see alternative things that are happening, and this is just about as disturbing, and that is, let's blame everybody else. I'm seeing progressives yelling and screaming at each other and denigrating each other for trying to be supportive. It's bizarre.
It's amazing the penchant people have to divide. I can post the most innocuous things sometimes on social media, and it becomes a spitting contest within 30 seconds. And
Yeah.
I don't know why that is. I don't know if it's because we're more interested in winning than we are in discussing.
Right.
I mean,
Yeah.
you're the psychologist, Darrel. I mean, why do people so immediately want to draw the line and escalate instead of, soothing and working in good faith to try to create discourse?
Well, actually, that's a really good question. It's a really good observation. I think what happens, I kind of write about this in the God Virus, for example. Ideology creates incredible amounts of comfort. Once you buy into a particular ideology, and many people have bought into an ideology here, whether they're progressives or conservatives, whether they're libertarians, Greens, it doesn't matter. When you buy into an ideology, then you start seeing the world through that ideology. Well, the fact is there's no ideology that is a very good representation of reality. Reality is always more complex than any ideology. So the deeper you get into an ideological framework, the harder the blow is when reality hits you in the face. And that's what happened here. That's what happened in 2008 to the conservatives when reality hit them in the face and Obama was elected. And that's what's happening right now.
Yeah, but for them, Darrel, Obama then became the devil. I mean, it wasn't enough that I disagree with his policies. It's not enough that he's a Democrat.
Right.
He has to be the Antichrist. Everything escalates.
Right. Well, they stayed inside their ideological bubble because they couldn't face the fact that their ideology itself was flawed. Well, we're facing the same thing right now, if you think about it. Are we going to stay in our ideological bubble? And when you stay in the bubble, what you do is you start blaming anybody else that's not as pure as you are in the ideology. And that's what we're seeing. Progressives are criticizing other progressives. And you see it in the news media. Different major political figures are saying, Donna Brazile was responsible for Hillary losing. Well, that's ludicrous. There's a hell of a lot more going on there than whether Donna Brazile violated some, minor thing. The fact is, why are we blaming? Why do we have this penchant to want to shoot down people that are sometimes our closest allies? It's because we can't get out of our ideological bubble and look at reality. What is the real? How does the real world function? And that's probably the best lesson people could learn, and it's a difficult lesson. How do you face reality, still maintain your values? Values are one thing, but ideology is another thing. Values, we can hold on to our values dearly, but when you reify those values into an ideology, then they become concrete in a very bad way. And that means that if you don't buy into every jot, diddle, and hair of my ideology, you're bad, you're wrong. And that's when you get such division, not just within the nation, but within a single movement too.
I will include the link to that podcast in the description box of this video because I think many people would like to hear it. They'd like to kind of see what you're about. I'm a little weird about what's going to happen. I mean, Trump doesn't represent me. I don't like the way he He portrays minorities. I don't like the way he portrays women. I don't think he relates to the common man. I think he's a largely, hugely manufactured legacy. Even his own ghostwriter said, I made most of this shit up. I see bad faith business deals. I see essentially I don't know how you speak about the ego in psychology, but when I look at Donald Trump, I see unfettered, unbridled ego. The presidency not being about the people or the nation, but just another way for him to be in the spotlight. I'm nervous about what's going to happen in the months and years ahead.
Yeah, I think we may have just elected our first bona fide sociopath, narcissistic sociopath. I actually have no doubt about that. If I was diagnosing him clinically, that's what I would call him.
That's what the ghostwriter Tony Schwartz had said in the New Yorker article. Describe him, and he said he's a sociopath. And he had an insider's look at the man, how he acts, how he behaves, how he speaks, and it's frightening to think of someone who's essentially the world's most powerful me monster now sitting in the Oval Office or about to sit in the Oval Office. Yeah, there's real reason for many of us to have concern, I think. I think it's valid to say, yeah, right. It's a scary future. But your overall point is stop freaking out about the stuff you can't control. Is that fair?
Yep, right. And then start focusing on what you can control. And start getting some gratification out of life again.
So, Darrel, with the holidays fast approaching, he's going to come up. Trump's going to appear in conversations over the Thanksgiving table, over the Christmas dinner table. Tensions might get high. You get family members together anyway. There's this myth that if you're on the family tree, somehow you automatically are. I mean, there's a bond there, certainly a familial bond, a tribalistic bond, but being on someone's family tree doesn't guarantee that you have the same values or that you even like each other. And now with Trump in the mix and the election results in the mix, things may get tense. Any advice for those who are attending holiday dinners and gatherings with families who disagree?
Gosh, well, I would definitely go in with the attitude you're not going to respond to the provocation, because you might have the Uncle Ned who wears his Make America Great Again hat at the dinner table, and you just don't want to respond to that provocation.
Now, is that passive aggressive? I mean, come on.
Hell yeah. I'd say it's even more than passive. It's pretty aggressive.
They're baiting, right?
Yeah.
It's like I had lunch with some family members the other day right after the election results were announced, and they were vibrating in their chair. They just couldn't wait to bring up the victory of Trump and how necessary. I mean, you could see it was, and I can't tell if that speaks to insecurity about their position, like they have to continually reinforce it, or what that's about. But I'm sure it happens at family gatherings over the holidays for sure.
Right. I just think I would go in mentally prepared to avoid, not avoid, but just don't respond. And if you are going to respond quietly and rationally as much as possible. I just think you're running in great danger. You're not going to win that argument any more than somebody talks about religion at the dinner table. It is a religion, by the way. Let's not get this wrong. The ideology is very strong, and it's as strong as any religious ideology. So to engage it is self-destructive. So I would just encourage you to go in with a positive mental attitude. Try to find things that you hold in common. Be kind to people. Touch them, hug them, tell them you love them. Keep that bond going, and they're less likely to be that passive aggressive. Even if Uncle Ned has his Trump hat on, go up and hug the sucker. I mean, because how can he hate you, and how can he be so mean if you still love him?
You're not going to convince him anyway. I mean, belief perseverance kicks in. No. Anyway, the guy doubles down. It just escalates. I've come to the point now, unless there is a crossing of boundaries, unless there's an inappropriate crossing of boundaries for me, I just nod and smile. Isn't that nice? Hey, the turkey tastes delicious. It's great to see you again, right. And see it for what it is. I try to remember that many of these people are sort of victims of bad ideas. That seems to help me a little bit.
Yeah.
That's good advice.
I think that's important. They are going to suffer. If all these things all of us are predicting, the people who voted for him are going to suffer more in some ways than the people who didn't. Oftentimes, it's possible. I'm not saying it will, but it's possible. So the fact is, let's make sure that you continue the relationship. You touching people in that kind of a situation at Thanksgiving dinner, touching people can diffuse the hostility, can diffuse the aggression. And that the tendency is we want to stay away from people. I don't want to touch Uncle Ned because he's an asshole Trump voter. No, let's go touch Uncle Ned. Let's tell him we really enjoyed watching the football game with him last week. And don't mention the election. Try to stay on something that you both enjoy. But I guess the best advice is touch people you would normally touch. That will diffuse. It's like the third wire in an electrical plug. It will ground out the aggression more than about anything else you can do.
Shake a hand, put an arm around someone, give them a great big hug. Just make that human connection.
Tell them thank you. Maybe thanks for something they've done for you recently.
Dr. Darrel Ray, I'm going to make sure that podcast link's in the description box. I encourage everyone to go listen to it. Thanks for your perspective and your great work, and we'll see what shakes out here in the months to come, okay?
Okay. Thank you for having me.